Hello, friends. It's your pal Sal here, guest host of Best Ball Live for 4 for 4. Usually you see Greg Sauce's pretty mug on your screen, but he's out and I am in. And I told 4 for 4 I was not going to do this show unless I got to pick my guest. And they said, Sal, do whatever the hell you want. So, with that having been said, I introduce to you my very special guest today, Shawn Siegele of RotoViz and RotoViz Radio. Shawn, 1, thanks for coming on. 2, how are you doing tonight?
Awesome. It's fun to be on the show with you. We've talked about doing this in the past. You and I have lots of fun conversations behind the scenes on email, since obviously I'm not super active on Twitter, I think we could say. And it's great to have a chance to chat with you live and do a draft here.
Well, this is good because we're going to be drafting in and live streaming an FFPC Superflex Best Ball Slim draft. And I have to say, you're probably one of, if not the biggest champion of the Superflex format in the industry, especially ever since we first introduced each other, I guess. Once I got to know you, you got to know me. It was kind of like one of those things. I'm not sure if you've seen that meme. It's like, hey, you like this? And they're like, yeah, I like that. Oh, that means we're best friends. So you like Superflex, I like Superflex. That pretty much means we're best friends in the Superflex realm. Would you agree with it to everything I'm trying to rambling on here?
Well, I don't think that I've had much to do with Superflex. Obviously, you and Scott and Ryan with some of the things that you have all done, but I love it. It's a fantastic format. It's a very important format, I think, for fantasy, as we see that the decline in value throughout the first round tends to make normal drafts unfair in a lot of different ways. Superflex remedies that and makes for just a more creative, fun draft. So I think Superflex is going in the direction of being the dominant format in fantasy, and you've played a big part in that. I think that's where it should be.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you might not be one of the people that played a huge part in bringing Superflex to the forefront, but you're one of the very first people that shouted out from the rooftops how much they loved Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues back when not a lot of people actually cared about the format as much as they do now. I know I always say Superflex is as popular as it is now because of Scott Fish and the Scott Fish Bowl and how big that tournament is every year. Before, people would say, well, I don't really like Superflex. I don't really like 2 quarterback leagues, but then the Scott Fish Bowl got super popular. Then he added the Superflex format. It's well, if you want to play in the Scott Fish Bowl, you have to play Superflex. And then at that moment, they realized just how much fun Superflex is. Why only draft 1 quarterback when you can draft 18 of them?
Exactly. And this is an FFPC show. A lot of viewers, listeners will know that we have the RotoViz Triflex Dynasty Leagues through the FFPC, where, that's a Superflex Dynasty format where you need to have that QB. It makes those dynasty startups a lot more fun as well. Got to have at least 2 good quarterbacks, if not 3, to be competitive. And I think those formats, we talk about the advantage in redraft, the advantage in dynasty, again, absolutely huge if you don't have that Superflex element. And then Superflex makes it a lot more fun. So you get really 2 for 1 in terms of how important it is.
Right. So as we mentioned, this is a Superflex Best Ball Slim. The main difference between this and a regular Superflex Best Ball draft on FFPC is this one is only 18 rounds compared to 28 rounds, and there's also no kicker, no defense. The rest of the settings are pretty similar. No 1.5 points per PPR for the tight end position, making it tight end premium. And as you can see at the bottom, you start I don't have it on, but you start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, 1 flex, 1 Superflex, 1 tight end. Then we have a whole bunch of bench spots. I find that having that many bench spots is a luxury for me because when I first started playing in 2 quarterback leagues, I played in a 14-team 2 quarterback league where we only had 2 bench spots, Shawn. 2 bench spots in a 14-team 2 quarterback leagues. So I feel with all these bench spots, I don't have to worry too much about do I want to draft a 4th quarterback? Do I want to draft a 5th quarterback? And then bye weeks play into it. How do you handle bye weeks when it comes to best ball drafts?
Well, I think we want to have some balance, right? We don't want to have everybody loaded up on 1 week, especially in a format like this where we're playing the full 17 weeks. We're going to get the total score from those weeks to determine who wins. We want to have those spread out. And so we look at probably drafting 3 quarterbacks. That's sort of the sweet spot for this format in terms of what our roster construction explorer tells you. If we can get those 3 quarterbacks spread, so we have at least 2 guys for each week, that'll definitely help us. We're also hoping that our quarterbacks stay healthy and we can get the 2 best out of the 3 there. But we'll also have some other elements that we'll bring in where if we do have the bad luck to have 2 bad quarterback scores in any one week, there are going to be some elements to our draft where we still think we're going to get a lot of points from those flex positions, which are obviously crucial to put up that high score.
So for anybody watching out there, this is going to be my very first ever live stream in the host role. I'm usually in the guest role, so I don't have to worry about pressing buttons or scrolling down through player names. But one thing I have learned from watching these streams is at the beginning, everyone cares about the bye weeks. And then once they're into the actual draft itself and they forget about bye weeks, they're just, oh, well, bye weeks don't matter. So I will try my best to pay attention to those. Hopefully we don't draft 3 quarterbacks with the exact same bye week. But then again, at the same time, I'm also of the mindset where I don't feel like that is going to be that big of a detriment to the overall strategy of our roster. If we end up 1 week with 0 points at a position, I don't think it's going to be that big of a killer by the time this tournament is over. How would you feel with what I just said?
It really depends. If the rest of your team stays healthy, then you can cover that up. Well, you do want to avoid as many zeros as possible. And you said that you're going to put really the onus on me to make these picks. We're going to discuss them, and hopefully this will be a Sal and Shawn team, not just a Shawn team, but especially if you're forcing me to make the final decision on all of these, then yeah, you're going to have some bye week responsibility. Make sure we don't hit too many of those same landmines.
Yes, like I said, I'm taking this lesson from Greg when he hosts the show every week. He says this is the guest team. So he lets the guests make the final decision on picks, and he just here along for the ride. I'm going to put up the draft room here. As you can see, we are picking 6 middle of the road. We already have our first 6 players queued up. And for people watching, they can see we have 1 running back, 1 tight end, and 4 quarterbacks. And so, Shawn, these were the players you listed in order that you demanded I put into this queue. Why don't we talk a little bit about our first round pick strategy, since we know we're going to be getting one of these 6 players?
Yeah, so in these early rounds, right, or definitely the first round here, we're trying to hit on a league-winning type of player. And we know that player can be one of these star running backs. We know that it can be Travis Kelce, that with the tight end premium, he really delivers the hammer. And then in the Superflex, the quarterbacks bring a lot to it. When we pull up the ADP for this format, we see that McCaffrey goes off the board, Kelce goes off the board a couple picks later, and then it's a bunch of quarterbacks. Dalvin Cook also in there. Alvin Kamara comes in a little bit after where we would be slated to pick. This week on Stealing Bananas, Ben Gretchen and I talked about the potential fall of the Uber back, right? And some red flags for Dalvin Cook, for Alvin Kamara. And we love those guys. So it's not like it's an anti-running back sentiment or anti-Cook, anti-Kamara, but it's going to be hard for the running backs to do in the first round what we would need them to do in order to pass on some of these hybrid QBs. So when you're putting together your 2 QB teams, and obviously you're the expert in this format, how much does it play in for you that these dual threat QBs now are scoring so many points?
It's been pretty much everything for my quarterback strategy. It has been for the past, I'd say, 5 or 6 years since our good buddy Rich Rebar coined the Konami code and showed us just how valuable rushing quarterbacks are. And as we've seen, even in 1 quarterback leagues this year, the ADP of the quarterbacks, rather than being able to wait later on, just grab whoever the hell you want, these rushing quarterbacks have driven up the ADP of quarterbacks. So instead of being able to say, wait for a Josh Allen previously, in rounds 10 to 12, or say 8 or 9, now they've risen up to rounds 5, round 6, which is still a lot better than say when you had to take a quarterback in the first round in a 1 quarterback league. So we're not at that point yet, but it feels like if you don't draft a quarterback who offers you that rushing potential, that you're kind of dead in the water at the quarterback position, unless you can find a quarterback who throws 40 or 50 passing touchdowns, but that might be 1 or 2 per year. It's super rare. So I know I personally prefer my quarterbacks to be able to run, and we kind of have our option of so many of those types of quarterbacks these days. And I feel like that's just the evolution of the quarterback position. I feel like each year when we get these new college quarterbacks coming into the NFL, they have some sort of a athleticism to them, and they have that rushing game potential in them. So those are the types of quarterbacks I always like to target.
And so when we're looking at these quarterbacks in the first round, we may not get a choice if Cook does not go early and push, say, 2 of them down to where we have a choice of 2 out of the 3. But if we have a choice there, do you have a preference between Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Kyler Murray?
Honestly, probably Josh Allen, because I feel like the Buffalo Bills just don't care about running the ball. And if they do, at times, like, Josh Allen is their number 1 running back. So I feel like he offers a little bit more. I still like Lamar Jackson a lot because he gets a bad rap for not being, for people saying that he's not a quarterback, that he's really a running back. But he's pretty efficient when he actually throws the ball. And I like the fact that they added some weapons to him in that passing game this year. So I also have no issue with Lamar Jackson. It's hard to really say anything super bad about these quarterbacks that you can target like the first or second round of these Superflex drafts. It's like I always joke with people like, yeah, my QB1 tier is like 25 quarterbacks deep.
Right. Yeah, you look at these three passers, and Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Murray right there with Josh Allen before the shoulder injury that really just sidetracked his season in a variety of different ways, both as a passer and a rusher. Now he gets AJ Green, probably washed up, but also Rondale Moore. He has that potential receiving threat injection that really was part of at least Josh Allen's emergence. And you look at Lamar Jackson and some of those stretches where he's not necessarily that far away, even with how poorly he played last year. And he's also getting an injection of talent there at the wide receiver position. I think that Allen is safer. He's safer at a very high level where he's also extremely high upside. But Jackson, Murray, I think that they have the kind of season at QB in their range of outcomes that is similar to what we've seen from Christian McCaffrey as a running back. And so if they put up a season like that, then I think it's going to be hard for quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, who is the best quarterback in the game, maybe the best quarterback already of all time, and Josh Allen, as good as they are, I think that Jackson and Murray may have even more ceiling.
Yeah, and as you see on the screen, I have the quarterback queue lined up here. Mahomes, Allen, Jackson, Murray, Prescott, Wilson, Herbert, Hurts. Like, I just listed 9 quarterbacks who I personally would feel comfortable being my QB1.
Yeah, so when we come back through in the second round, if Hurts is there, is he a no-brainer pick for you?
It also depends on the receivers and the tight ends on the board. In some cases, you may see like a George Kittle fall in that mid-second round. I'm all about the tight ends. I love drafting tight ends and receivers, and especially when you talk about FFPC because the tight end premium format. I feel like if you can ever get a Kelsey or Waller or Kittle on your team, I just feel like this gives you too much of an advantage for when you go to build the rest of your roster.
It looks like, based on the current ADPs in this very specific format, that Kittle will fall to us. There's a lot of concern, obviously, about how much pass volume there is in that San Francisco offense if Trey Lance takes over very early on. TJ Hawkinson likely to fall to us in round 4. Do you have a preference between those two guys, considering the difference in cost, Kittle or Hawkinson?
If I'm going on cost-wise, I prefer to grab the guy who has the cheaper price tag. So obviously that would be Hawkinson. I do feel there's probably like a big 5, maybe a big 6 at tight end position. You can tell me what you think about that when we got Kelsey, Waller, Kittle, Hawkinson, Pitts, and then Andrews. I feel like is that the last of that tier. So if I can get any one of those 6 to maybe my tight end 1, I'm feeling pretty good about it.
And the numbers really back that up, that if you get one of those guys, and you should have exposure to all 6 of them, then your chances of winning in these formats with the best ball, with the tight end premium, it really just skyrockets the win rates.
So see, the draft has started. I believe Christian McCaffrey went first overall, and pick number 2 is on the clock right now. There might be a very slim chance that Travis Kelce falls to us at the 106 pick. How quickly would you want me to make that pick if that happens?
His gap over the rest of the tight ends projects to be so large. Darren Waller, another possible option. He's kind of in a weird spot for us where with the 6th pick, he's going to go at that sort of first, second round turn. So we're about as far away as you can get from where he's likely to go in a draft. if Kelsey were to fall to us, that's an interesting selection because, like you said, we have to pass up on getting one of these QBs in the first round, and really the ceiling that they have is just so much higher. So in the Superflex, it makes it a much more difficult choice than in more traditional formats where Kelsey, I really think, is the 102.
Unfortunately, our good buddy at FF Wheeler took Kelsey from us. He's in this draft. He might even be watching the stream. Wheeler, if you are watching, just let us know how much you hate us in the chat by taking Kelsey before we had a chance to do it. So there we go. McCaffrey, Mahomes, Cook, Kelsey. Pretty balanced start so far. 2 running backs, 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. So we're looking at one of the top 3 tight end options you picked. So we're on the clock now. So we got Derrick Henry went. So we can have a choice of these 3 quarterbacks: Sean Allen, Jackson Murray. It seems from the conversations we've been having so far, Josh Allen is going to be our choice here.
Yeah, I have quite a bit of exposure to Murray, almost none of Allen or Jackson. So one of those 2 guys. And with what you were saying with Allen and some of the things we can do with him, let's make him our pick.
All right. So there we go. Halfway through the first round, 3 running backs, 2 quarterbacks, 1 tight end. We can start talking about our second round strategy here. We can start building our queue up a little bit here, Sean. So we add some more quarterbacks, some receivers, maybe some tight ends. How are you feeling?
Yeah, Russell Wilson, an interesting pick there potentially in the round 2 if the quarterbacks would fall a little bit more. I think that having a couple of running backs go early there, mostly a fluke. We won't see that continue. Herbert, if he were to fall, I think the question starts to become Jalen Hurts. He's the guy who possibly will make it to us. And then if we pass on him, would we come back with Joe Burrow, Tom Brady? The difficult question, I think, is that if we were sure that Burrow or Brady would make it back, I think passing on Hurts for one of these top wide receivers, a top tight end, you mentioned in the show notes talking about modified 0 RB in the Superflex. We do see that drafting just 1 running back who's going to have a big workload in these first 3 or 4 rounds, again with the Superflex pushing everything down, that leaves you with very, very high win rates. So if we had a running back in that second round that we loved, that's almost a no-brainer because it sets us up with flexibility to do whatever we want later on. We can take all of our favorite players. We don't have to worry about the different positions. Everything works once that running back is in the stable. However, if Darren Waller would somehow fall to us, he would be the clear pick at that spot. And then we would have to decide Kittle, maybe Stephon Diggs. Do we want to go with Hurts, or is there a running back that you like there? So start looking at these running backs in round 2. Do you have someone you think could be, say, the 102 next year? I'm assuming Christian McCaffrey, he stays healthy this season. Maybe he doesn't average 28, 29, 30 points a game, but scores 25, is the clear 101 again next year. Can one of these second-year guys jump up and become the 102 in 2022?
I know a lot of people have been hyping up Jonathan Taylor and Cam Akers as those potential future 101s. I've always been a big Antonio Gibson fan. I have been ever since he was drafted, based on an article Joe Pano had written for 4-4, just going over the type of football player he was and how he would fit into that Washington offense. And I know there was some circumstances that forced him to be the team's number 1 running back. But at the same time, we saw what he did, and everyone made such a big deal out of him not really being a running back in college. And we kind of saw that didn't really matter once he made his way to the NFL. I know Alex Smith isn't there. People like to say that Ryan Fitzpatrick is an upgrade at the quarterback position. I'm not going to fall into that trap. I still feel like that was Alex Smith's team. But in general, Antonio Gibson is the one second-year back that I feel I have to draft everywhere whenever I can. And at first, it wasn't too bad during the offseason where you could get him in the 4th rounds, but now he's creeping up into that second-round territory where his cost is just getting a little too high, even for my liking. But if you're forced me to say right now which second-year back is going to have the breakout and be a potential 101 next year, it is definitely Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, I think you're in good company there. Our good buddies, the ship chasing guys, absolutely love him. I was fortunate enough to be on Gibson as a result of the great work of Travis May, our Debbie superstar, Jack Miller. fantastic rider. Those guys were really pushing him last year. So there with Joe, really doing the promotion. The question here is if there's any chance he would wrap back around us into the third, do that. This is super flex. Now I've seen him go in the first round of traditional drafts. So at this point, probably a little bit difficult to get him to come back into that area. What if it's Akers here? Say Gibson is even gone at the point that we draft. Are you out on Akers? Is he a big step down from Gibson?
No, not at all. I like my guys. I don't mind reaching for my guys, but I have no problem going towards the value in draft. So we are on the clock here. Barkley went, and then Austin Eckler just went. So Akers is there. And if you do want to take a running back and he is at the top of your running back queue, that's fine. We also, Hurts is still available. But again, like Burrow is still there. We have 44 seconds to pick. Waller did go, unfortunately, but Kittle, I believe, Kittle is still there. Most of the top receivers are still on the board. So we kind of have our choice here of taking whoever the heck we want.
Yeah, well, let's see how far Kittle falls with the current concerns about the 49ers passing game. We have some quarterback options in round 3. Maybe we like them better in terms of how close they are to Hurts than we do at running back. So let's take your guy. Let's go with Antonio Gibson here.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to say Cam Akers. So one thing I did want to talk to you is just about general quarterback strategy in Superflex and in Superflex Best Ball Slim. Pretty much 90% of the streams that I've been watching of the Superflex Best Ball Slims and the drafts that I've been involved in have been very quarterback heavy. And as you mentioned earlier, the more quarterbacks go, the rest of the skill position players fall down. Like in a traditional draft, you wouldn't see the likes of Saquon Barkley or Jonathan Taylor or the receiver from Kansas City fall into the second round. Like those guys are usually early to mid first round picks. So I want to know, when you're in these Superflex drafts and you are in a quarterback heavy room, and for example, right now we haven't taken a quarterback with our first 2 picks, do you start feeling the pressure having to grab one? So right now 8 have gone and we have 3 picks left in round 2.
Right. So I think it works out perfectly. We want to get that QB exposure. We want to be aware of the running backs and how in traditional formats, they're definitely overvalued right now. So we can use that to balance things out. If you pull up the RotoViz Roster Construction Explorer, you're going to see that having 2 quarterbacks in those first 5 rounds or so, you have to have that, right? You need to have that element. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the first round. It doesn't have to be starting QB, but you do need those first 2 guys. And then if you actually wait a long time on your third quarterback, that's when the win rates get extremely high. So if you have a depth QB that you have confidence in that you can come back with late, that really rounds out the 3 QB roster that you want for the best ball. And it allows you to do something, essentially taking the QBs, putting them up, and then employing that modified 0 RB type of build where we have an elite running back, we have an elite tight end, and then after that, we really hammer wide receivers.
So now we have 2 receivers off the board, 11 quarterbacks. Kittle did go right after us. I want to ask you this question. I've been toying around with this idea of modified 0 QB in Superflex leagues. So basically the same philosophy behind the modified 0 RB, but instead of 1 running back early, we take 1 quarterback early so that we have our QB1, and then we can kind of like wait a little bit in like say the mid to like later rounds to start targeting that QB2 slot. Do you think that's getting too cute in Superflex leagues? Do you think that if we wait a while to hammer the quarterback 2 position, that it just isn't going to work out in our favor?
Well, so I'll take us back to our list here so we can prepare this pick. But as we do that, I really like waiting in traditional formats for the quarterback, right? I think that playing chicken at the quarterback position is really the way to go in redraft. To an extent, it can be the way to go in Dynasty, although it does put you in a position where you can have a great Dynasty team that isn't competitive because you didn't hit on your QBs. In Best Ball, I don't think it works the same way. You really need to have those elite guys to get the big performances, that optimized lineup really pulling those elite performances forward even more. In Best Ball, you just have to have the stars.
All All right, so we are on the clock now. We got Jones, Harris, Brady, Hopkins, Adams, Ridley, Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Kyle Pitts. I feel like we have the C is wide open to go in any direction we want here. And then this is our boards for Josh Allen and Antonio Gibson. The teams behind us had the exact same quarterback, running back build for the next 3 picks after. Actually, 4, just flipped Kamara and Herbert.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts about going with the QB here? We have Brady. It's been early on for the quarterbacks. A lot of guys have gone ahead of ADP, but Brady really somebody who gives us that upside with the receiving core that he has, really has that weekly potential to blow up, create those big scores.
Yeah, I think if we take Brady here, which is going to happen because we have 1 second left, it gives us the comfortability that we don't have to worry about that QB2 position for at least until like round 7 or 8. Like, I feel like this next tier of Ryan, Lance, and Wentz field, like Mayfield, those guys are probably going to go around, say, by round 6, round 7 at the latest. And so then we're looking at the likes of Fitzpatrick, Tua, Wilson, Carr, which are all quarterbacks I feel 100% comfortable with as my QB3.
I agree. Those guys are good values. If we were to wait outside the first 10 rounds, which there's some evidence to suggest that we should do, where are you on going with Mac Jones and assuming that he wins that job early enough that he can start to contribute in our lineup, or going with Teddy Bridgewater, someone who, unless they're able to add Aaron Rodgers, really seems like he will be the quarterback there in Denver, has to be the heavy favorite to win that quarterback competition in camp.
This was actually going to be one of my questions to you, is how do you handle these potential quarterback battles in these best ball leagues? You mentioned Mac Jones and then Cam Newton, Teddy Bridgewater, and Drew Lock. I feel like that is a hidden advantage in these Superflex best ball leagues, is if you can have a strong stance on who you think is going to be the starting quarterback position, then you don't have to be one of those like wishy-washy drafters where you have to take both of the quarterbacks. Like, for example, in Denver, Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, they have similar ADPs in these Superflex Best Ball Slim. And I feel like if you take one, you kind of have to take the other if you don't know who's going to be that week 1 quarterback. I'm with you. I think Teddy Bridgewater is going to be the clear-cut quarterback in Denver. And if you have that same stance, that same opinion, I think that's a huge advantage, because then not only are you not wasting 2 picks on the same position on the same team, you're potentially getting a starting quarterback at a very great value.
Definitely. So coming back around in round 4 here, we had talked about Hawkinson being kind of the value for us. Now, there are going to be some other options that come back. How does he fit in here compared to, say, some of these top wide receivers who are still available? And do you prefer Pitts? Mark Andrews might come back around to us in round 5, but if we miss on Hawkinson, I might almost be willing to grab Andrews up just to make sure we have that, and then we can build at some other positions.
Yeah, like I said, I mentioned my 6 players who pretty much fill out that tight end 1 tier, and I feel like if you get one of those 6 tight ends, you're definitely doing a great service to your best ball teams. Also, it's kind of insane how many good wide receivers are available in this 4th round of this best ball team. But again, that goes back to the fact that it's super flex and it's just driving down the value of every other position. Like Carson Wentz just went ahead of the likes of DK Metcalf, Andrew, AJ Brown, Michael Thomas, Terry McLaurin, TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews. Like, it's just crazy to me how insane these quarterback values have gotten in Superflex leagues in the past 3 years.
Yeah, Carson Wentz, somebody, it's the bounce back potential is very real, but the safety, when you're talking about a pick in this range, doesn't necessarily look like it's there, especially since that team could be very run heavy and very successfully run heavy. And so we'll have to see how he develops. We do have a team that has started out Waller, Hill, Adams, and I think we have to give them the most credit so far for having the guts to not take either a running back or a QB through 3 rounds.
Right. And if we look at the QB tier, like Matt Ryan, Trey Lance, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, Baker Mayfield, like if they were to go quarterback here, they're still going to get like a top 15-ish option at the position. And that's one of the things I feel like if you do enough Superflex drafts over the year, you come to find that you can conquer the game of QB chicken, because it really is a battle with your mind. Where like if you're new to the format and you find out like you have to start 2 quarterbacks, immediately your mind goes to, well, I have to draft 2 quarterbacks early. But the thing is, you don't have to draft 2 quarterbacks early. You just mentioned Team 11. If you look at Team 3, start off with Cook and Chubb, still end up with Aaron Rodgers in round 3. It's just the mindset of knowing that you don't have to draft a quarterback early, but also just putting in the practice, like just doing a lot of Superflex best balls or doing a lot of mock drafts where you just notice that there actually still is some quarterback value in those mid rounds, and you don't need to blow like 2 early picks on the position.
Well, Sal, in the fishbowl, my quarterbacks are Derek Carr and Ryan Fitzpatrick. So as the 2 QB guru, am I dead in the water there, or did I hit 2 guys who are going to come through and win from the late QB perspective?
I actually like Carr and Fitzpatrick this year, and I'm assuming that if you mention that Derek Carr and Ryan Fitzpatrick are your top 2 quarterbacks, that the rest of your roster is just absolutely stacked.
We'll hope that's the case, yes.
So we are on the clock. Let's see who just went. AJ Brown went earlier. I'm just waiting here for this to load up. All right, so we are 2 picks away.
We have the choice of our
tight ends
if they make it through one more pick. Out of these 3 guys, do you have a personal favorite if Pitts makes it one more slot?
For me, it is Kyle Pitts. I just like being one of the guys that's early on these rookie tight ends, and I feel like he is basically going to be the de facto number 2 receiver in that Atlanta offense. But at the same time, these 3 guys are pretty similar for me. As long as we get one of these 3, I mean, it doesn't really make much sense for me to say it is that I don't care which one of the 3 it is. Like, I know that's not the kosher thing to say from a fantasy football analyst, but at a time like this, names don't mean all that much to me.
Well, I don't have much exposure to Pitts at all. He usually goes earlier than I can possibly really work him in. We've made it into the 4th round here. He's right there where the other 2 options really would be Hawkinson and Andrews. He seems like the ADP value at the spot. Okay.
So there it is. The one thing I was going to say is there might be a possibility that if we took Hawkinson or Andrews, Pitts might still been there in round 5 if we wanted to double them in the tight end position and we want to look at the ADP value, but I have no problem taking our guy there. I do like, though, how I said at the start of the stream, this is going to be your draft, and I was going to put the onus on you to make the final picks, but you keep picking all the players I like.
It's been a good fit so far, Sal. That's why we wanted to do this here. So coming back in round 5 now, it looks like it's time to pivot to the wide receivers. Who are we looking at? Who should we put into our queue?
I mean, really, there's an insane amount of options. Michael Thomas, Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin, Allen Robinson, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Woods, Godwin, Moore, Evans, like pretty much everybody. If I just keep scrolling down, it's kind of hard. I'd say right around Odell Beckham would be the end of my tier of the players I just showed on the screen. So if there's guys that you like, you let me know. I'll put them in our queue, and then we can rank them from there.
Yeah, so let's fire up CeeDee Lamb. He seems like the guy to me with the news that Cooper may not be quite 100% healthy. Lamb is the person I'm targeting in this range anyway, but if anything were to happen to Cooper, either because of a little bit lingering right now, which probably will be easily cleared up by the time the season starts, or something occurs once the season begins, I think Lamb has that potential to be a top 2 or 3 wide receiver this year. And I like to go with these second-year players. I think that even though people now understand that that's the season you want to target them, there still is a little bit of opportunity on some of these guys. I mean, look right here on the board. You see a lot of players have gone ahead of Lamb. If Lamb is who we think that he is, then this would be the season that he makes that jump into the top 5, and he's not going in that range. I think that given the offense, given the quality of QB play we're going to see from Dak Prescott, given the volume of passing that they'll almost certainly have, I don't think that he can really hurt you too much in this area. The upside's still off the charts.
So as we've seen this offseason, CeeDee Lamb's ADP has been creeping up to the point now, at least in underdog drafts, he's going ahead of Amari Cooper. Kind of what you've been saying about him, you're on board with that right now? You would take Lamb over Cooper?
I am. Amari Cooper is very good. And, I've had him at times as even the number one overall dynasty player. Obviously, at that point, he went and did have a couple of bad seasons there with the Raiders. He's rebounded. He is a borderline star with the Cowboys. But I think that Lamb is the guy who could be the next DeAndre Hopkins. You put DeAndre Hopkins at peak level in this offense with Dak Prescott, then again, you've got wide receiver 1 overall potential here. Now, I think that because of this particular season, Hill and Diggs, they have 20-plus point per game potential. I wouldn't expect Lamb to necessarily score in that range, but if you told me that he averaged 19 points a game this season, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
So if we look at the draft board, I feel like we're probably going to be targeting receiver. At least receiver will be the top of our option for the next 3 to 4 rounds, based, I know, on the types of players that you like to draft usually. How do you feel about that in Superflex that we've started 2 quarterbacks, we have a running back, we have a tight end? Are you okay on just forgetting about those positions until we solidify our wide receiver group?
Well, I don't think that Mark Andrews necessarily should be off of the board. If you have those 2 elite tight ends, we know that within the tight end premium format, the potential not only to score a lot of points yourself and to dominate that flex position, that he's a good option. Now, he goes right there at the 502, so no longer a consideration for us. There are some interesting running backs. One of the things that I talk about a lot this year is that in part because owners now understand the running back dead zone, there are actually some interesting dead zone values as people play that in a way that maybe doesn't solve the problems, right? And presents some opportunities there. So, if we talked about J.K. Dobbins, if we talked about a Travis Etienne, even a Josh Jacobs, somebody I don't own anywhere, but those are guys that I think, you'd have to consider. But when we look at dominating the flex positions, it's a little bit different in Superflex because you are hoping the quarterback takes that spot as opposed to in a normal league where really you need to have 4 wide receivers, right? If you have 2 flexes, you have your 2 starting wide receivers, then 2 more wide receivers have to fill into those flex spots if you want to score the most points possible. This is a little bit different to where if we wanted to pivot slightly because we have a quarterback in there, we're looking a little bit more starting lineup heavy, then I think those running backs, I'm more open to it in this than I would be in most places. At the same time, if we do have that wide receiver heavy build, the win rates are just very, very, very high.
Right. So we have one more pick ahead of us. J.K. Dobbins just went. So I feel like you started talking about J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins was drafted. People in the stream are listening, watching as we draft. It is our turn. Dallas Goedert just went. We do have Travis Etienne still there, Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs, you mentioned. CeeDee Lamb, I feel like he is your clear-cut option. You talked about so much. He's still on the board.
Yeah, Terry McLaurin also a good potential pick there, but Lamb's the player I'm really in love with in this spot.
I know I always say draft the guy you want. Like even if CeeDee Lamb, say he was 3rd in that ADP list and Terry McLaurin was ahead of him, you're going to kick yourself more if CeeDee Lamb gets drafted by somebody else than if you take him there. So we've started with
the next pick.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like if we took McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb would have been the very next pick. So I feel like and there goes Mayfield and Lance. I have to say, Team 11, I've been keeping my eye on this whole draft. I want to see how far they're going to take this game of quarterback chicken because it's still the end of round 5. 20 quarterbacks have gone. But if you see who's left on the board, you still have the chance at Justin Fields, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Zach Wilson, Derek Carr. Maybe not the high end of the quarterback tier, except if Justin Fields does start from week 1, I feel like we're going to be talking about him as a top 12 quarterback this season in fantasy. So if that was his draft strategy to get a Fields there, it's working. Or if he just really prefers grabbing like 2 or 3 or even 4 of the quarterbacks from like that mid to low end quarterback 2 tier, because he's definitely built himself up a value team at this point.
Yeah, and you can always go with that Fitzmagic Carr combo there. I don't think Carr is as good an option in a best ball format as he is, say, in the fishbowl, where his ability to limit turnovers, his ability to limit sacks really play into that scoring system. But if you think that Henry Ruggs is a breakout guy this year, he's not priced that way. Fantasy participants are not suggesting they think that he is. But if you're on the Henry Ruggs bandwagon, then I think that Carr should be your pick in a lot of these formats.
So he did finally to quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick. I have no issue with that. I was going to ask you, because before we started the stream, you had talked about stacking not being the best move in best ball drafts. And I mentioned Derek Carr, number 11, did have Darren Waller, so the possibility of stacking Waller with Carr. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your anti-stacking stance in these best ball streets?
Well, one of the things that we're looking for is sort of a balanced approach with maximizing the weekly scores. And so Blair's done some research. You can go to the RotoViz Best Ball Explorer. You can look at the different stacks. We have a stack explorer within that tool. And one of the things that is a little bit surprising is a lot of these formats, the stacks don't work as well as people think that they do. Now, there's a difference between stacking in this format, where we have a 17-week total point system, and a lot of the best ball tournaments where you're trying to score big in week 16, week 17, maybe big in the playoffs overall. So a little bit of a different dynamic there. I'm not necessarily looking to do it in a full 17-week tournament like we have in this situation. That kind of, again, frees us up to take our preferred guy each time, not necessarily have to force us in any direction to make sure the teammates match up.
So we are on the clock again. Pretty much every single one of the running backs you mentioned is still on the board if you do want to pivot there. Like I said, Etienne, Jacobs, Gaskin Davis, Miles Sanders is at the top of the tier. The receiver position, they got picked a little bit, but Cooper, Moore, Evans, Jones, Chase, Kupp. Look, I could keep going on and on and on about the receivers. We have 30 seconds on the clock. How would you like to make this next pick?
Well, it's hard to pass on ETN right here. I think that his potential to really explode and score a ton of points makes him an interesting pick. And again, then we don't really like to be running back heavy early, but it does give us some flexibility for how we approach it from this point on.
Right. And even though you don't like to be running back heavy, again, in these Superflex drafts, the receivers just keep falling and falling more than they would in normal leagues. So rather than force yourself to go 0 RB, you're taking that running back value, and you still have the potential of building a pretty nice receiving core as you look at who's available. Cooper, Moore, Evans, Jones, Chase. One of these receivers, as you can see on the screen, most likely more than one will be available when we're up next. I would have been surprised if Etienne would have been there in round 7 for us.
I think that's the case. One of the things that I do think people get wrong is this idea that wide receiver is deep and therefore I can wait. Well, you don't get more than one pick out of 12 in that range where it's deep, right? So if you wait and say, okay, well, in the next round, I'm going to like my wide receiver options. That may be true. You get to pick one guy in that round. You don't get to pick 4 of them, right? So if there's a round or even 2 rounds where wide receiver is the clear pick and almost all the picks are wide receivers, you're just going to get 2 of those guys. And so that's something that I think people tend to look at and play incorrectly, because the fact that wide receiver is deep, if that's in fact the case, again, you go to the Best Ball Explorer and you find that in terms of win rates above expected, that say in a non-Superflex format, the traditional Best Ball format, that really collapses after round 6. Well, that tells me that people are A, playing it wrong, and B, that it's not maybe as deep as they think that it is. But one of the elements is that, again, you only get to make 1 pick out of 12. And so even if there's a range where it's stacked, you're not going to get to pick a bunch of those guys. You just get to pick 1, right? So you have to start picking them in order to have enough of them by the time that you get through that deep area. And so I think that ETN could be the wrong pick from that perspective. DJ Moore, who just went there at the 6'11", really probably the guy that we should have taken. But I'm just so much higher on ETN than his draft slot that I will deviate at times for that. And one of the things I talk about, when you're employing a 0 RB build, is you want to understand the potency of that structure. You want to understand the value that gives you in terms of total points that are embedded in your roster. At the same time, don't pass on somebody that you have ranked in a completely different area from where they're going. If you have somebody 2 rounds earlier than the slot that ADP has them, and they come to you at a spot that's value. So in terms of looking at the ADP in our tools, I have ETN going sort of in the early 6th. It's not a big, fall for him to go to us in the mid 6th, but it's a good value when you consider that I also have him ranked well above ADP. And so when I'm coming off of 0 RB, it would be to make decisions of that style or that type.
Right. And the way I was looking at it when we were on the clock there, we were looking at the running backs. We mentioned Etienne. We didn't mention Sanders, but he was at top. We mentioned Jacobs, Gaskin, Davis, and we're seeing Sanders and Jacobs both went. By the time we were back on the clock, I feel like we might see a Gaskins and Davis go here, but only Cooper, now Fant. It's still driving those receivers down a little bit.
It is. Fant's someone who would have been interesting if we wanted to get that second tight end. One of the things, and it's a little bit tricky to tell because we don't have huge samples for the combination of Slim and Superflex. Obviously, Slim debuting last season, so it can be tricky to try and draw too strong conclusions from 1 year, and then there aren't as many Superflex drafts in the Slim as there are regular drafts in the Slim. But in all likelihood, there are some benefits to having 5 players from that combination of QB and tight end. If we wait too long for our second tight end, then there are some reasons to consider a third. We know we want a third QB, and so Fant would have been a guy who's interesting kind of in that range. Do you have any other tight ends that you would be looking at here and maybe wanting to get so we could go with just 2 tight ends instead of 3?
Logan Thomas is usually at the top of my boards. I feel like this might be a little too early for him, but we're also kind of in that weird spot. If we wanted to take a tight end and we wanted to take Logan here and we don't, he probably wouldn't come back to us in round 8. It's just like such a weird spot to be in the middle of the rounds for the tight end position. Looking at who's available, honestly, I have Logan Thomas a tier above pretty much everybody else. So if we wanted to grab a tight end too, and we don't want to worry about the position again for the rest of the draft, I would be okay taking Logan Thomas here because he is at top of my tier and because I don't think he'd be there in round 8.
Yeah, he appears to have a late 7 ADP. Who do we have at QB? What are you seeing there? I mean, at wide receiver. What are our wide receiver options if we decide that we need to start hitting the position right now?
A lot of damn good wide receivers. Evans, Coop, Lockett, Thielen, Ayuk, Johnson, Beckham, Galladay, Claypool, Devonta, Cortland, Robbie, Tyler, Judy. It's like I just could keep listing receivers, and I would say that I like every single ones of the ones I mentioned. Like it's just insane. Julio just went, Kupp just went, and Darnold just went. I feel like it's either between tight end, if we don't want to worry about tight end 3, or quarterback, but I'm not sure. Zach Wilson there, I feel like he shouldn't still be on the board right now. Based on this quarterback room where we've seen 26 quarterbacks go so far. Like I would take Wilson before Darnold, Winston, Carr, Jones. Fields I'm kind of iffy on. So I feel like Fields is the better quarterback. I'm just not sure when he's going to start.
Yeah, let's
So it's like, yeah.
I'd really like to try for one of those late QBs and see how the roster comes together. So maybe we go with Thomas here. Mike Evans would be the other guy that I think sort of a home run pick at this price.
Well, you say home run pick. I'm going to have to take him if I can get there in time. No, did we get him? It's funny, the stream lags with the draft.
No.
Thomas. We got Logan.
Those are the 2 picks that I really like. So Logan Thomas, he's someone I am drafting a lot of different places. I think I was probably, if not the earliest, one of the earliest people to take him in the fishbowl. I think that his potential to have a Darren Waller-like secondary breakout, it'll be interesting to see with Fitzpatrick in town, with the offense being a little bit more aggressive now. They drafted an interesting sort of semi-sleeper rookie wide receiver. They added Curtis Samuel. I think that Logan Thomas is going to benefit from the quarterback play. I think he's going to benefit from having some of those peripheral receiving options, take a little bit of the defensive attention away. I don't think that he has to lose as much target volume from sort of that last month or so of the season as it might seem like with some of the pieces that they've added.
All right, so we have Pitts, we have Thomas. Do you feel comfortable with just those 2 tight ends for the rest of the draft? Or will you be willing to take another one depending on who is available if it's a good value pick?
Yeah, a value pick we should definitely be open to, because we know, again, that the tight end in the premium format can make a big impact in the flex position. We want to be aware of the way that the flex position really does sort of separate the teams that dominate from the teams that end up in the second half. But having Thomas there does give us the flexibility, again, to do as many different things as might come up for us. So I really like the fact that we have that pick, because, again, flexibility is key here. You don't want to lose value later on in the draft because you have to really force the different positions that come up.
And I just wanted to point out, even though I wasn't paying attention to the bye weeks, we didn't get hit too hard. Logan Thomas week 9, Kyle Pitts week 6, Tom Brady week 9, Josh Allen week 7. So we are okay when it comes to bye weeks, Sean.
Very nice, very nice.
So I mentioned Zach Wilson earlier. Team 11, who was waiting on a quarterback, now took Ryan Fitzpatrick and Zach Wilson in rounds 5 and 7. I'm not going to lie to you. I really like that quarterback combination a lot, especially because he was able to grab Waller early, grabbed a couple of receivers, a couple of running backs to kind of build out the rest of his skill position spots. And I feel like he's probably going to grab another quarterback to team up with Fitzpatrick and Wilson. That's going to make a nice trio. But it just goes to show you that if you do wait, sometimes you are rewarded. It doesn't always play out this way. I've been in a few of these drafts where I once waited on to like round 5 or round 6 to grab my quarterback one, and it was an absolute disaster for me.
Yeah, well, he gets the quarterback that you were wanting there. So it can work out. If you wait, it can work out. We know that the numbers really like the early QBs. We know what the logic is behind that. But anytime someone has the guts to wait, I think that we have to have a little bit of a congratulatory nod in that direction as well.
So I'm going to just take a moment out of the draft stream to be a company man and mention that if you sign up for a 4for4 subscription, you do get an FFPC voucher worth up to $35. And for watching the stream, we are going to give away a $35 FFPC entry. Just guess who Sean and I are going to pick in round 9. Guess it in the chat. So pick a winner randomly. And now we are on the clock after I did all that talking. And looks like Jared Goff just went. Your home run pick, Mike Evans, went. I'm sorry we were not able to get him there, but we still do have a good selection of receivers if you want to go that route.
Yeah, so who will be your top 2 or 3 picks here?
I go Lockett and Johnson are the 2 that stand out to me. I think after that, the other ones are kind of like in a tier below them.
Yeah, where are you on Kenny Golladay this year with the New York Giants?
See, for me, that's tough one because I am all out on Daniel Jones. And so I feel like kind of dings Kenny Golladay a little bit, but at the same time, who else other
Let's
than...
go with Johnson here. I just say that because we were getting into
we're getting there close, yeah.
Chemo on the clock.
I'm just like down on the Giants offense on the whole. So that's why I'm kind of down on Kenny Golladay, but there's no denying that there's going to be a high percentage chance that he's just going to dominate targets in that offense.
I would agree. And if a team takes a step forward like the Bills did last season, Madison Parkhill wrote a fantastic article for us talking about how Golladay could be the catalyst for Jones in the way that Diggs was for Allen. I liked Allen better. I like Diggs better than I like that Giants combo, but I think it is an interestingly priced one when you look at where those guys are going in drafts.
I'm just seeing Cam Newton just went. So we mentioned earlier Mac Jones was a potential QB3 target. If we look at the quarterback position, and we do want to take one, is there anyone you feel like you have to get like in the next few rounds, or do you want to just keep waiting a little bit? Because we are in round we'll be in round 9 in our next pick, so halfway through the draft.
Yeah, I think that there's a good chance that now that teams have addressed their QB situations, they've got the 2, some teams have the 3, they're going to be willing to wait a little bit more on these players who have a lot of potential downside, where there's a lot of risk. And so I'd be looking to wait until round 11, round 12, round 13, and target someone like a Jones, like a Bridgewater. You could even look at someone like a Tyrod Taylor quite a bit later than that, or take the big risk and assume that Aaron Rodgers goes somewhere else and that Jordan Love actually can play a little bit. If he ends up being the starter there for the Packers and they're even decent, then you have sort of a league-winning selection at QB very late.
All right, so if we look at our team right now, we have 2 quarterbacks, we have 2 running backs, we have 2 receivers, we have 2 tight ends. We just have a balanced team overall. How are you looking at our 9th round pick coming up?
Well, even though Lamb and Johnson are very exciting wide receiver selections, we are still weak at that position. We probably want to continue to load up. A couple of the guys that I like in this next area would be a Tyler Boyd, would be a Jerry Judy. The Broncos are tricky with the poor quarterback play they will probably have. The Bengals are a little bit tricky because they have the 3 receivers to split it among. Then beyond that, we have Juju Smith-Schuster, interesting in that 3 wide receiver set with the Steelers. He does just go, so we don't have to worry about whether or not we would slide him in. Where are you now with, say, Galladay versus going a little bit further down at ADP and looking at Boyd, looking at Judy?
I would probably have Tyler Boyd at the top of my rankings if we don't include Odell Beckham. I do think Beckham is in store for a bounce-back campaign. I know there's a lot of concern about his injury history the past few seasons, so I'm okay. Like, my heart would not be broken if I didn't get Odell Beckham. But yeah, it's definitely Tyler Boyd for me. I don't have much concern of that 3-headed monster in Cincinnati. We saw the pass volume that Joe Burrow had last year. Like, yeah, he's probably not going to attempt that many passes again this year. But we've seen that the Bengals are willing to air it out, and it never hurts to have that many talented pass catchers on the same offense, especially when you don't have to worry about an elite tight end. Like, say, if you're in like a Detroit offense where it's like all these receivers you don't know that much about, and then TJ Hawkinson. But in this case, all that talent is concentrated in the wide receiver position. And I love Jamar Chase. I love Tyler Boyd. I love Teagan's. Like, I love every one of those Bengals receivers.
And by getting Boyd, we would get exposure to the offense at a less expensive price. So there are some real benefits to that. I think that because he is such an elite player, even though he's a possession threat, you have some extreme touchdown upside with him as well that people may not be factoring in. He's going to be playing in a juggernaut offense for the first time. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out and just how many points they can score. Of course, he does go at the 901 here, and that moves us on to maybe the next tier on our board.
So you did mention Jerry Judy, so I put him in the queue there. Would he be your top option here?
He would be. I'm also open to a Galladay because, as you mentioned, he is going to get that target volume, and I think that the offense will be improved. Judy's someone who had a split profile as a rookie, right? You look at the volume, you look at the air yards, you look at the way that he drew the targets and was able to get open, and then the combination of poor QB play and all the drops makes it look like he didn't do much as a rookie. Now, we want to be aware of the fact that he struggled, right? We can't just write that off and say, okay, well, talent is no issue at all. We know from what he's done in college, we know from his ability to get open. I think even in this offense where they're going to have some other quality targets, that Judy has a ton of upside if that offense works at all. And I think that we have to have some confidence that it will. They just have too much overall talent. I think the upside is there for him to be a guy who does what we're expecting Lamb to do, what we're expecting Higgins to do, what we're expecting Ayuk to do. Judy doesn't cost us much to find out if he takes the next step that we're anticipating from this group.
So Kenny Galladay did go as well, removes him from our board. So it does leave Judy at the top of our queue. 1, 2 more picks, and then us. We might need to talk about a couple more receivers added to our queue because I know FF Wheeler is watching the stream and he's drafting against us. And I would not be surprised if he wants to take Judy from us before we get a chance to. How would you rank the next 2 receivers?
You are up next.
I do think that we get a tier break after Judy here. But Deebo Samuel, someone who could be maybe the best fit for what the 49ers are going to do this season. He had such a big rookie campaign. We would have expected a step forward last year, but injuries really ruined that. He's now a little bit overshadowed by the fact that George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk look to be so good. And yet again, it's a situation like with Tyler Boyd where you can get exposure without having to pay the prices those other two guys demand. And considering what the pass volume might be, being aware of price is something that should factor in for us with those 49ers wide receivers. There's also the interesting element of if we feel like we're beyond the tier break, if Jerry Judy does go, where are we with some of the other positions? Running back is something that we don't really want here based on our structure, but if there's someone who's a no-brainer, that would have to factor in, at least be an option. Of course, glancing at those names, I'm not sure anyone jumps out to me as someone that we should be looking at in this area.
All right, so Samuel did go, leaving us with Jerry Judy. Do you just want me to take him?
Yeah, I think that should be our guy.
All right. So this is a good opportunity to ask you about your stance on teammate receivers. Like you mentioned, Judy, Cortland Sutton went 2 picks before him. We've seen Laviska Shenault go. DJ Chark is still on the board. Do you have a stance on one receiver over the other in those two respective offenses? I feel like the answer for Denver is Judy because you did have him at the top of your queue. But if we focus on the Jacksonville offense, DJ Chark versus Laviska Shenault, where are you on those Jaguars pass catchers?
I like them both. I think that Shenault, with all the buzz that he's generating, you have to look at him as potentially being the guy who could be an alpha receiver. I think that DJ Chark, very talented. He had the big second season. Players who had that type of season in year 2 almost exclusively go on to be big-time professionals. At the same time, there is some inconsistency in his overall profile. Not a dominant college receiver, not a huge rookie year, not a great year 3. And so we're really looking at more bad seasons than good ones. That's a little bit of a red flag for us there. By contrast, Shenault could be a guy who next year is drafted in the top 10. I think you have to really look at that when you're trying to figure out what the different scenarios are, what the different range of outcomes are. The other thing that I kind of alluded to there, also the issue with Cortland Sutton, I prefer to get the rising guys as opposed to people who are coming off of red flags or coming off of elements where we're not as certain. Now, Cortland Sutton is a guy who looked like, he could be not a DeAndre Hopkins or Julio Jones level player, but would slide into the next tier below that, score a ton of fantasy points, be one of the sort of borderline stars for a long time. But now that he's into this offense where you have Judy, you have someone like KJ Hamler who tends not to get drafted at all, you have Noah Fant. When you combine the injuries with the target pressure, then again, I think that rising type of player is someone I prefer to have the exposure to. But in both of those offenses, I don't think you can go wrong. I think you want to, again, be taking the lesser priced player in many circumstances because we don't know. And we do think that those guys are talented. We do think that they are sort of both cheap in some circumstances because Jaguars and Broncos, those offenses are not expected to light the world on fire. If the offenses do take a step forward, then their players are going to pay off.
Right, so going back to our FFPC contest that we had earlier, 3 people did guess our 9th round pick of Jerry Judy. It's Ryan Turner, Kev Wheeler, and Skinny Dog 62. If all 3 of you can put your FFPC account email in the chat, we'll pick a random winner later on and reach out to you via email after the show. So we just finished round 9. We're halfway through the draft. Let's see, 31 quarterbacks have gone so far. And if we look at the quarterback room that's available, we're looking at either backups or making a stance on a starter. So like the Taysom Hills, Teddy Bridgewater's, Mac Jones, Tyrod Taylor, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jordan Love. You'd mentioned round 11 as a possibility of targeting one of those quarterbacks, so we don't need to worry about that position yet. When I showed you the running back room earlier, you almost ran away in horror at the names on the list. Tight ends, we have 2, Ingram, Tonyan, and Irv. Troutman are still there. And then if we go back to the receiver group, starting to get picked apart a little bit. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 receivers went in a row. 12, 13 of like the last 15, 16 picks have been wide receivers.
So this is a great example of what we discussed a little bit earlier, where you only get the 1 pick out of 12 and it can get thin in a real hurry. We see players like Chark, like Gallup, like Mike Williams go off before it gets back to us in this round. Salad is getting thin. Who should we be looking at here?
Now you are on the clock.
Okay, so we are on the clock. Again, we've hyped up Logan Thomas. We've talked about Terry McLaurin, Ryan Fitzpatrick. I do like Curtis Samuel. I'm not sure what your thought process is about having players from the same offense on your best ball team. I'm okay with it personally, like having a receiver and a tight end on it. Curtis Samuel would be at the top of my list. I also like Jalen Waddle a lot. I'm going to throw out a curveball at you. You tell me what you think. Damien Harris.
I think that Patriots offense gets split enough ways, and Harris doesn't get the high value touches that are necessary to be a big time scorer. So I would probably go back to the wide receivers. Samuel isn't someone I have a lot of exposure to. He would be interesting there. Marquise Brown, someone I think fits the format really well. Jarvis Landry finished the season hot when he was finally healthy. Baker Mayfield taking the step forward. Jarvis Landry always undervalued. He would be a crafty pick in this range as well.
Why do you think people just hate Jarvis Landry? I put him in our queue. Let's see. Oh no, how did we get? Oh my! See, this is what happens when you stream and then your stream is lagging behind the draft board, and we end up with Raheem Mostert.
But you got to lean into that. Mostert should be the starting running back on the 49ers team, who have pledged to run 500 times. So we look at the silver lining there. One of the great things about timing out is that you get the best value to ADP. So now we're set there with Mostert. Our picks at some of the other positions will probably come back to us. I always look at these situations where when something happened that you weren't expecting or weren't intending, it usually works out for the best. So when we look at this draft at the end of the year, I think we're going to say Mostert was the guy who won the league for us. It's very good that the fantasy gods knew who we really wanted.
So I want to ask you this question, not because of the screw up, but just because Trey Sermon went in round 9 and we took Mostert in round 10 in a best ball. What are your thoughts on taking 2 running backs in a murky backfield from the same team?
Well, I don't want exposure to both of them in the same draft, but if you're looking at across drafts, then I think there's a lot of value to it. Once you get into these ranges where the backs have a lot of upside, but you're not certain of how it's going to work out, if you get a good price and you're having a running back with some talent in the right offense, I mean, Mostert consistently puts up some of the very top times in terms of on the field, next gen stats, who was the fastest player in the NFL that week, Mostert breaking through, scoring these big touchdowns, adding the gaudy yards per carry. And when we're looking at how you score big points in these best ball formats, then he really is the perfect player. The only concern with him would just be the injury risk, right? He hasn't been able to stay healthy. If he does stay healthy, I mean, you're looking at round 10 as being 5 rounds undervalued. So I don't think that there's any big problem with him. Sermon, the upside there is so tantalizing, but I mean, you're paying a lot for a guy who's a rookie and probably not the starter. And we have to look a little bit in that if this 49ers offense is what they say it's going to be, and he has this sort of RG3 Cam Newton type of season, how many touchdowns does Lance take away from these guys? And that's a problem a little bit for those backs in Baltimore. So I think you have to be price sensitive when you're drafting him. Although, again, any of these 49ers could be home runs because that offense is going to score a ton of points.
So one of the questions I did have for you at some point during this stream was to talk to you just about some of your favorite RB2 targets. So like backup running backs on an offense. We've seen Tony Pollard just went. Chase Edmonds and James Conner went in the same round. We mentioned Sermon, Mostert. Are there any current NFL backup running backs that you've been targeting in best ball drafts, either because you think that running back is going to be like a lottery pick if the running back head gets injured or just doesn't play well, or just backup running backs you think are better than the starting running back?
Well, if you're looking for guys who could replace all of the production, and not all of the production in terms of scoring the same number of fantasy points, but would probably be the guy in the case of a first-round player going down, I think Hubbard is an interesting player as a rookie. I think Darren Evans is a guy who could not replace Henry's rush value. Nobody's going to do that. Derrick Henry may be the best running back in the NFL, the best pure rusher, but the receiving upside is going to balance a lot of that out. So you'd be excited about those guys. Giovanni Bernard, someone who fills in as that pass catching back in an offense where Tom Brady probably would like to dump it down a huge number of times. You have Samaje Perine, who, actually how big is the gap in talent between Joe Mixon and Perine, right? I mean, I think that Mixon gets a lot of publicity, but he doesn't necessarily run to the level of his reputation. Now, Mixon, the argument is obviously he's going to have a ton of touches, a ton of high-value touches. And so, he could lead the entire NFL in terms of high-value touches. You want to have some exposure to that. But Perine's someone you can get all those touches from if Mixon goes out, and he's absolutely free. So those would be some of the backups I'm looking at where I think they could make a big impact at a very, very minimal price.
All right, so we have 2 picks before us. Okay, now just one. I did put Jarvis Landry in our queue. Adam Trautman just went. So if Jarvis Landry does not get picked before us, I feel that that's a no-brainer pick there.
I think so. We were talking about, you like Waddle, Marquise Brown, an interesting bounce-back player with the vertical element. We had an article today, a debut from Rob Lorge, talking about Antonio Brown having huge upside if anything happens to either Evans or Godwin. So there are some choices there. And unfortunately, Landry does go one slot before us. Sal, who do you like in this slot? I don't have any exposure to Waddle. He's an interesting guy. He has a chance to really blow up in week 1 with Will Fuller out. And that would be something where it's a lot of pressure for this rookie who's still trying to recover from a fairly significant injury last year to say, okay, week 1, you've got to have a huge game or else, there are going to be guys coming for your target volume right off the bat there. But if he breaks out for the Dolphins and Tua takes the next step forward, then, maybe you're talking about him in 6 months as being this year's Justin Jefferson. Now, again, I don't think he has that same profile, but he does have that interesting vertical ability, that elite speed.
That's pretty much exactly what I am banking on, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it's not really something you can predict. I'm going to put Marquise Brown here just because I feel bad about the Jarvis Landry debacle from the earlier pick. One player I will say that I am kind of intrigued by that's still on this list is Elijah Moore. All offseason, the hype was that it was going to be Denzel Mims season. And then slowly but surely, the beat reports were coming out about how Mims doesn't really fit this offense. Elijah Moore has just been standing out in practice and in camp, and that he is going to be the slide into like the number 2 receiver spot when they go 3 wideouts or when they only have 2 wide receivers on the field. How are you looking at these Jets pass catchers?
I think that it's going to be more right off the bat as the guy there with the Jets. He has so many positive things about his profile. You look into the work that Blair Andrews has done on projecting wide receivers. Matt Spencer, fantastic work on this as well. Elijah Moore just ticks so many of these boxes. When you get someone who comes in with that kind of prospect profile and then you hear that they're immediately dominating in camp, then I don't think that there's anybody there with the Jets who blocks him. I think the question is a little bit more about Zach Wilson, how quickly he'll be able to put this together, and if there's enough upside really for any wide receiver in this Jets offense to make them a priority here when there are some interesting guys who are also there. We're starting to get into that range where Moore becomes, I think, one of the picks you have to very closely consider. We do have both of the former Alabama speed guys still left. Do you have a big preference for Waddle with the potential target competition versus someone like Henry Ruggs, who was a disappointment last year, but now the Raiders really seem like they're feeling the pressure to prove that that wasn't a completely wasted pick? Derek Carr actually playing pretty decently at this point. He had some connection with Nelson Aguilar last year. You have Waller, who's going to be the main guy in that offense, but playing off of him, Ruggs might be able to run free. He's going to have that deep ability, but it looks like they may also scheme some targets to him, which would give him that target floor that he really needs. If we're taking a risk on these Alabama speedsters who maybe did have some questions about their production when you compare them to Judy and Smith in that offense there with the Crimson Tide, do you like the second-year guy who's had a chance to adjust a little bit, or do you think the player who didn't have a bad rookie season is probably the one that we want to look at?
You are up next.
The way you broke that all down, you just painted such a rosy picture of Henry Ruggs that I haven't really heard about this offseason yet, because there's just been a lot of late offseason hype and buzz around Bryan Edwards. The Henry Ruggs is kind of like sliding under the radar a little bit. I have
You are on the clock.
no problem like banking on a second year turnaround. I'm not one of those fantasy players where like if you had a horrible rookie year, you're dead to me. But at the same time, I'm always one of those guys that just like loves the new shiny toys. So I kind of like gravitate towards the rookies, because I always find that rookies in fantasy drafts provide so much value, because a lot of people just don't want to like bank on relying on someone that they haven't seen produce at the NFL level yet. So like I always kind of like, I'm of the mindset where I like to be like a year early compared to being a year late. So I'm okay taking that risk on rookies. But again, you sound like a guy that is very into a Henry Ruggs renaissance year two.
Well, I think that he makes sense if you didn't get elite wide receivers, which we didn't. At the same time, he's less expensive than Moore. So let's go with Elijah here and see what comes back around to us.
Okay. So I'm just slide more. And Jalen Waddle did go one pick before us, I believe. Yeah, right before us.
Now, coming back in round 13 and knowing how the Patriots have treated rookies at some less important positions than QB, making some of those running backs wait every year, the difficulty they've had developing wide receivers. Mac Jones, he's going to be a better passer than Cam Newton, and starting his development would seem smart for them. They probably are not competitors to win the Super Bowl this season. I know that there's that pressure with Tom Brady having the success with Tampa Bay, but it would seem to me like it makes more sense for them to be targeting 2022, try and win that Super Bowl by getting Jones ready, than to somehow try and play it both ways this year. But is that offense too difficult to learn? Is it too big of a learning curve for Mac Jones? Where do we need to be looking at him? And he goes in the pick after us there, so we don't have to necessarily make that decision. Should we have picked him in the last round? We talked about round 12 as being a quarterback round.
Well, we talked about round 11 being where you wanted to grab that QB3. I thought, based on how very few quarterbacks had gone from round 9 to round when we were on the pick around 11, that we might have been able to get Mac Jones around 12. So I didn't want to look at the quarterback position. But if we do go quarterback now, our options are very limited. It's either banking on Jimmy Garoppolo playing decent enough to hold off Trey Lance for like the first half of the season, banking on an Aaron Rodgers holdout or trade, or banking on Drew Lock beating out Teddy Bridgewater. I don't find any of those three options that appealing. I think Jordan Love obviously has the most upside if he were to actually start from week 1. I am of the mindset, I might be one of the few in the minority where I think Jimmy Garoppolo is actually going to start more games than people think he will in 2021.
I can see him starting for the first month. He just makes a very difficult best ball pick when you're looking at the likelihood that he's not there for most of the season. And
I think any quarterback we list here isn't an appealing best ball option.
Well, but Jordan Love, right? I mean, if Aaron Rodgers isn't there, I mean, they almost have to go that direction and take their lumps and get things going. And, he's got at least some hybrid potential to balance out struggles that he has as a passer. We look at Drew Lock, and even with the move that they made for Bridgewater, you get the impression that the front office would like Lock to be the guy, and it's more sort of the players within the team, which this isn't a great situation, but they think that Bridgewater is pretty clearly the better quarterback. And so I could see Lock playing a lot. If he gets that first month and he develops even a little bit, and we're talking about a team that, again, it's going to have Fant, it's going to have Sutton, it's going to have Judy, it's going to have KJ Hamler, who is probably the best value in fantasy of any player right now. You have to be a pretty bad quarterback to not make it work with the skill weapons he's going to have.
Yeah, I just think that Bridgewater is the better quarterback. I feel like he's going to start week 1. I've just been avoiding Drew Lock. Maybe that's just me being a bad analyst and not playing out the potential outcomes that could happen in Denver. It's just that usually by this point, if I'm going to draft a Denver quarterback, I've already made my selection of Teddy Bridgewater a little bit earlier. I guess what our options are this limited, you definitely can make the case for Drew Lock. I don't want to bite into it. But if we want a quarterback 3, which I know we definitely do in Superflex, Drew Lock and Jimmy Garoppolo right now offer our best potential of at least possibly being starters. Like Jordan Love has a few major hurdles that have to be cleared for him to be the starting quarterback, whereas like Jimmy Garoppolo and Drew Lock, like the range of outcomes is that they are the week 1 starter, and if they play well enough, could at least start like the first 4 to 6 games.
Can we see the board here, Sal?
Yeah.
I'm interested in terms of.
So there's only 3 teams that have 2 quarterbacks, including us.
Yeah, I don't think that we need to worry about drafting a quarterback for a while. Those guys are, as you mentioned, unappetizing enough. They should continue to fall. Andy Dalton, really the guy, I think, who has almost full season potential. Those Bears coaches need to win. They have been very adamant that he's going to be the starter. I don't necessarily believe the Bears' weapons are good enough to support what Dalton does. I think they probably need to make the move to Fields. I think that they probably will, but there is a scenario where he could be a guy for the full season if he gets them to that situation where, they're 6-3, 8-4. I don't think that they'll make the move the Dolphins did last season.
I will say I'm very glad that we did get 2 quarterbacks early, because if we didn't at least get Tom Brady in round 3, I feel like we probably would be in that exact same situation. Instead of worrying about our QB3, we worrying about our QB2.
Who are we looking at the running back position now?
All right, so here we go. We got the Gus Bus. We got David Johnson, Jamal Williams, J.D. McKissick, Latavius Murray, Tarek Cohen, Singletary. Is there anybody here that stands out to you? James White, Madison, Penny. You mentioned Hubbard earlier. I feel it's a little too early for him right now.
I think that in most drafts, you really want to get either Zach Moss or Devin Singletary. I think the running backs are going to score a lot more points in Buffalo this season than they did last season. I think that both of those guys could end up having good years, but I think one of them definitely will. So creating some of that exposure is good. I don't know that we have to draft him yet because he's not a particularly popular guy. Ruggs might be the interesting choice still to make sure that we have some of that upside at the wide receiver position, balance out waiting on it a little bit earlier. McCole Hardman getting a lot of buzz recently as well could be that cheap way to play the Chiefs. He's more expensive than Ruggs, so if we wanted him, it might be the slot right here.
And we did get Henry Ruggs.
I like it. Fastest player in the NFL, or the second fastest after Tyreek Hill. A lot of targets up for grabs there. With the
joins Raheem Mostert in our speed team. So it looks like we're getting a little mini receiver run here. Gage, Ruggs, Davis, Moore. If Hardman does slip to us in the next round, I don't think that's likely. Would he be the target for us here?
We have to be a little bit careful of having too many wide receivers. Now that we have a little bit better depth, we wanted to make sure that we got someone before Rondale Moore was gone. So if we passed in round 13, then I think by the time you get back in round 14, then the value is completely gone. So I think that we needed to make that pick. Hardman might get back around to us, but I think it's likely that the receivers are done at least until maybe round 18. Some of the tight ends we might have looked at if we wanted to add a third one. Gerald Everett, Cole Kmet, those guys went in round 12. Do you have another tight end behind them that you would be looking at? What are your thoughts on Zack Ertz? We know that he's going to get moved. There's a chance that he moves to an offense where they think that he's the last piece to push them to a Super Bowl. If he goes to a team that is really put together and has good quarterback play, would you expect him to bounce back? I mean, he's into his 30s, but we also know that someone like a Travis Kelce is a top 5 pick overall.
Yeah, it all depends on landing spot for me. So I think you have to kind of decide, where do you think Zack Ertz is going to land? Most likely going to land on a contending team. I don't feel like he wants to be traded to a team where they wouldn't be contending for the playoffs. everyone keeps putting the pieces together with the Buffalo Bills. Before you mentioned Ertz, I was going to say Dawson Knox because he's usually there available in the later rounds, and it's just a cheap way of getting exposure to the Buffalo Bills offense. So, like I say, if you miss on the Allen or you miss on the Diggs or you miss on the Moss or the Singletaries, or depending on if you're a Gabriel Davis guy or Emmanuel Sanders guy, Dawson Knox usually kind of gets overlooked in these drafts at the tight end position. Maybe not so much when it's a tight end premium scoring format, but he's always a guy I kind of look to if, say, I miss out on Gerald Everett. He's been one of my top tight end 2 targets this offseason. I try to draft him as much as I can. You mentioned he went earlier. So it is down to Dawson Knox for me. I could be talked into Zack Ertz because, like, say, for example, he does go to Buffalo. He would just basically be taking away Dawson Knox's role. And if we mentioned the Bills' offense, Emmanuel Sanders just went. And Jimmy Garoppolo went as well. So there goes another quarterback target off our list. I know I dominated that tight end talk. Was there someone on that tight end list that appeals to you?
I probably, at this point, am Zack Ertz or going with just the 2 tight ends. I think that Ertz does have that bounce back potential. If he lands with the Bills, for example, then he immediately jumps at least 5 rounds in ADP. Devin Singletary goes a couple picks before us there. I think that's unfortunate. So it's probably a running back selection here. We talked about some of our guys maybe we didn't need to take yet a couple rounds ago. Now really into round 14, anybody should be on the board for us, very much in consideration.
Yeah, like I said, we think David Johnson is going to be producing in Houston. He's still available. If you think McKissick is still going to have a high target role in Washington, we got Latavius Murray. There's been some talk about Cohen possibly having some injury concerns. There's been a lot of Damian Williams talk. Still don't really know who's going to be the Jets' number 1 running back this offseason. There's been talk of Tevin Coleman potentially being that guy, Michael Carter, Ty Johnson, James White, Madison Penny. I feel like any one of these running backs would be okay with me.
Yeah, I've been targeting Phillip Lindsay a lot in this range. I think that he has that speed potential that you really want, that dynamism the offense might need. At the same time, David Johnson, even at his very reduced talent level, which definitely seems to be the case, right? I mean, he's not the guy he was in 2016, not the guy he was even a couple of years ago. The high value touches. Now you can say, well, Houston's not going to have any high value touches. They may not score a touchdown all season, but David Johnson has a very intriguing profile when you're talking about round 14, right? So again, we want to be aware of if we ever get an exposure to someone like a David Johnson, we want it to be at a several round discount. I think that's what this is right here.
And I know the appeal to Phillip Lindsay, but it's just so hard taking him when David Johnson still is on the board. Was it 2 years ago when we were talking about David Johnson being a first-round pick? He is still technically the starting running back in Houston. So you're getting a potential starting running back in round 14 of fantasy drafts, which doesn't happen all that often.
Now, one of the things that I wanted to check out and did go to the RotoViz roster construction explorer to look at is just how bad the results are if we take the risk and just go with the 2 QBs,
okay.
Right? And the tricky part is that this isn't employed very often. And so we don't have a lot of numbers on it. And especially we don't have a lot of numbers on it when you go with the early tight end as well. We know the early tight end is a hammer if you hit. Now, we took a lot of risk taking Kyle Pitts instead of a veteran tight end. But I might be a little bit more tempted to stick with just the 2 QBs unless we feel like it's a no-brainer with, say, Love in the 18th round, because the average score for people who went with 2 QBs in those first 4 rounds and only 2 QBs was much, much higher than the 3 QB average. I don't necessarily think that we should count on that. There are some logical and structural reasons why having only 2 QBs is very risky and doesn't give us some of the optimization elements that having a third quarterback does. But I'm not sure that we want to force a third QB here. And again, the results suggest that your average score is actually going to be very high, or could be very high, if you take 2 quarterbacks early. Again, that's the value of having Allen, having Tom Brady.
That's interesting to think about, because you wouldn't assume that to be the case just in instinct. In a Superflex league, you would just assume Most people are going to have 3 quarterbacks. If you have 3 quarterbacks, that's going to lead to a higher win rate just because you have more options at the quarterback position. But if we just look at our board, for example, and if we think about it in a 2 quarterback structure versus a 3 quarterback structure, and we look at our team of Josh Allen and Tom Brady compared to if we look at Team 12, Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz, Daniel Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, Sean. I don't want to badmouth Killer Frogs, but I would rather have our twosome than his foursome.
Well, when we're talking about winning the league, obviously to win, Josh Allen and Tom Brady have to stay healthy. We're not going to win if either one of them gets hurt. You have the element of covering the buys where if you just go with 2, then you're going to have a 1 QB week at least twice. And you also have this element then where if we take a 3rd QB and that QB actually factors into the starting lineup quite a bit, then we probably also aren't going to win, right? I mean, if we're going to win this league, Josh Allen and Tom Brady have to be the guys who score. So I think that based on how we've set this up at this point, we want to make sure that we're having the points at running back, wide receiver, tight end to get the job done and have it not be those positions that cost us, because we're very married to this idea that Allen and Tom Brady are going to lead the way at QB.
So if we look at our current roster build, and let's say we ignore quarterback and tight end, we have 2 of each. We have 4 running backs. We have 6 receivers. We have 4 picks left. How do you want to break down these last 4 picks if we ignore quarterback and tight end?
Well, if we go to only 2 QB, right, then I think that the 3rd tight end does come into play. I think that Ertz is a pretty crazy value at this point. He might be my next pick, but then we have some of those. So he goes off the board at the 1501. We have some of those running backs that we discussed. So we have Darrington Evans. You have a Giovanni Bernard. Do you want to go for the swing for the fences pick in Evans, or look more to Bernard getting us a lot of those points, assuming that he's actually a pretty similar talent to a James White, could have one of those actual like low-end RB1 seasons. I'm a huge Ronald Jones fan. I think that he is one of the more talented pure runners in the NFL. Unfortunately, he had a lot of somewhat tricky catches last year that he did not make, so I don't think he's going to be able to play on these passing down situations. Leonard Fournette, kind of a guy who's a bad runner and bad receiver, but because he's big and can do both, he falls into touches, which obviously that makes a difference. But those guys, I don't see a path for them to blow away ADP. Bernard could be a low-end running back 1. He could be in that running back 12, 13 discussion, and he's still on the board here in round 15.
To me, I look at it as who is the one of those 2 that will be available later in the draft. I feel like Evans has been climbing up draft boards. I know I play a lot more on Underdog these days just because it's so easy to get on that app. And I've just seen Evans's ADP climbing up more and more. Like before, you used to be able to get him like round 18, round 17. But now sometimes you see him in round 15, round 16, where Giovanni Bernard has kind of been creeping down a little bit. So if I had to pick one of the 2, I would go for the home run pick in Darrington Evans. And also because you don't partake in Twitter anymore, you haven't seen that Darrington Evans has become the hero of fantasy Twitter because he was sticking up for all of our content creators. I can't remember who it was. So I do have Evans and Bernard there. I will lean to you on who you want to take. I'm just going to explain the Darrington Evans story. Let me know, do you want Evans or Bernard in the queue, just so we have it lined up?
Well, if Evans is really pushing the fantasy guys, then, I mean, he's got to be the pick, right? I think that the difference here is a little bit whether you're trying to win your 12-team league or if you're trying to win hundreds of thousands of dollars in a big tournament. Yeah. I think that Evans is the guy who has the chance to be this year's most important player. At the same time, he's not nearly as valuable as Bernard unless something happens to Henry. Definitely don't want to be in a situation where I'm rooting for someone to get hurt. But if we can get both of those guys, if you think that Evans first, Bernard second is the way to maximize our chances, then that sounds perfect to me.
All right. So we'll go there. I mean, I've been wrong a couple times in this draft already. I'm okay going 0 for 3, striking out. But going back to Darrington Evans, I can't remember. It was some NFL player. He was making fun of content creators who had like under 400 fans or like 400 views on the stream, saying like, how can people live like this? And like Darrington Evans came out and just like was in support of all these content creators, because I guess he's also a streamer himself who doesn't have that many views. And so he was just like interacting with all the content creators, like hyping them up, like send me your, I'm just gonna let the clock go. So we got Evans. He was just like, send me all of your streams. If you have merchandise, send it over to me. So he was just trying to become a part of the content creator community. And I feel like that might have influenced drafters a little bit.
Well, it should. He seems like a great guy. And like I was saying earlier, because of the injuries last season, we weren't able to see him as the next Alvin Kamara, which is what the Titans front office were really trying to bill him as early on. But he came into college he came into the NFL with this really cool profile. I like the speed guys, right? I'm always looking for the next Chris Johnson, the next Jamal Charles. You're not going to find the next Christian McCaffrey, obviously, but I like the guys who are a little bit smaller, run to daylight, have those big plays. Evans fits perfectly with the style of player I like to draft.
I know we are here in round 15. We'll be up round 16. At this point, you're just trying to take shots on guys who you think have that upside if they get a chance to play. Like, there is the potential that Darrington Evans could be the next Bishop Sankey, someone we hyped up to extremes at one point and disappointed. But then every once in a while, we do get like those Arian Foster types, those Chris Johnson types that do blow away all of our expectations. And I feel like I would rather have the running back who, if the running back ahead of him went down for injury, God forbid, in the Tennessee offense compared to the Tampa Bay offense, because in Tampa Bay, you still have to deal with Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones, whereas in Tennessee, you only have to deal with Derrick Henry on the depth chart.
Definitely. The potential for him to fill in for Henry there is just, again, we don't want to be getting too excited about a scenario in which a real person gets injured, but it's easy to see how that might work out and score a lot of points and have Evans be someone that the community can really celebrate. So
we haven't really looked at the receiver queue lately. There's a lot of familiar names: Beasley, John Brown, Marshall, Aguilar, Paris Campbell, Rashard Perriman, Brian Edwards. I've been drafting a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown because I feel like that Detroit passing offense, outside of TJ Hawkinson, we don't really know who's going to be the number one pass catcher. Could it be Perriman? Could it be Amon-Ra St. Brown? Could it be Tyrell Williams? And those guys usually are available in the later rounds. Philip Lindsay just went. There might be a chance here, Sean, that we do get Giovanni, as long as number 9 doesn't snipe us here.
And then, Sal, Dawson Knox is gone at tight end. Almost all of the interesting tight ends are gone. Are there any really deep tight ends that you like at this point?
So I'm going to throw a name out at you that only came to my attention because of Danny Kelly over at The Ringer, which is Kylan Granson. Has he been written up on RotoViz yet? I don't think I've seen a Kylan Granson RotoViz article yet.
Well, I know Travis May has covered him for several of our different outlets, but he's not someone we're necessarily expecting to have a big rookie season. Do you have any interest in Herndon as a bounce back guy? Do you like Freiermuth to have that rare? I mean, we've already taken one rookie tight end. If we're saying Kyle Pitts, maybe we like him there in Pittsburgh. Dalton Schultz, somebody that I like in a lot of these drafts, but he also is gone.
I was in on Herndon a lot until the reports started coming out that he might not even be the starting tight end in the Jets, and that Tyler Kroft might be the number 1 tight end in New York. Again, beat reports change all the time, so I have to go with what is being reported. And so I kind of like slid Herndon off of my draft slots. Freiermuth I could be talked into, just because if we go to the Pittsburgh tight end section, I mean, can you really make a case for any of the tight ends in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I mean, it always seems like they might be excited to move on from Ebron if Freiermuth gives them the opportunity, if he flashes early, but it probably isn't the direction to go. He's someone that Blair Andrews and I have a lot of ownership of really early in the offseason before the NFL draft. in the classic, so the 28 round version where you're drafting some even deeper players and you have to have that tight end volume behind. It probably doesn't work quite as well for the slim here. So we have the 2 picks left. We have a very balanced team that is thin at QB, thin at tight end, but that allows us to build a lot of depth at the wide receiver and running back positions. So the question I would have for you here, we've talked about how we do have some concerns with the Broncos, but we both like Bridgewater. I probably like Hamler over all of the wide receivers that were being mentioned there. He's someone that I drafted in the last round of almost all of my drafts. If somehow he does have a breakout season, it's going to be very good for me. He did have a couple of big games in that stretch last season. He had a double-digit target game. He had a 2 long touchdown game. It's hard to see him getting the volume, but he is the type of talent and the type of splash player that if someone were to get hurt or if the QB breaks out, then I think things change a lot. We tend to focus on some of these other 3 wide receiver groups and say, okay, those guys are all decently valued because we believe in their talent. We believe in the offense. If someone gets hurt, then the other 2 guys are going to outperform draft position because they're all a little bit discounted. Is there anything to that with this Broncos group, or is that looking too far down? There's just really no volume left in a bad offense after we have Sutton, after we have Judy.
I think I'm with you that there's going to be potential for a 3rd receiver to have a role in Denver. We saw last year Tim Patrick. No one really saw him coming out and having a good season. I know some of that was because of the injuries to the top receivers, but you're looking at offense. It's got Sutton, it's got Judy, it's got Hamler. Patrick is still there. You got Noah Fant. You got Albert O. It's kind of tough for me to put an importance on the potential number 3, even number 4 pass catching option in an offense that could be led by either Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater. But at this point in the draft, you kind of just want to hit on those upside players. And again, we don't want to bank on injuries, but maybe we look at it where Sutton or Judy just underperforms. And then all of a sudden, Hamler is thrust into the role of a number 2 tight end, and you're drafting basically as a last round pick in a best ball draft. Those are the types of like home run, hit for the fences types of picks you want to be making at this point.
Do we have a situation at all where we like the running backs to the extent where we want to be running back heavy, even though we did take a couple running backs early?
We did get Gio there. If we look at the board here, for me it'd be Tevin Coleman, just because of the situation in the Jets where he has the potential for a decent sized role. Other than that, maybe Kenny Gainwell if he were to get a decent role behind Miles Sanders. But really, you're just looking at guys who you're banking on either an injury or ineffective play to have a role at this point, like Madison, Stevenson, Ahmed, McKinnon, Brown, P. Ryan. They're all kind of grouped similarly to me, just based on the situation where they are in their team's offense.
Well, I mentioned P. Ryan earlier. Give me your thoughts on Ahmed and JV and Hawkins, a couple of guys who are on depth charts that don't have dominant starters to where we're confident that they would have to hold the starting position, and then maybe don't have a lot of depth behind them either.
I was in on Hawkins a little bit immediately after the draft because the Falcons didn't draft anybody. We saw they got rid of pretty much their entire running back room this offseason, added just Mike Davis. And you can't think to yourself that Mike Davis is going to handle 95% of the workload. But I was reading profiles from a buddy of mine, Zach Reed, at Tacit Assassin 13, who had a very sour opinion on Javian Hawkins, the player, and that he wouldn't really fit in the Atlanta Falcons offense. So I kind of moved away from Falcons backups and just kept going all in on Mike Davis. So I haven't really been in on Hawkins. Ahmed, it's kind of the same thing. I've just really been into Myles Gaskin. I've kind of turned around on Malcolm Brown being a potential like goal line back vulture. So if I do end up taking a Dolphins backup running back, I tend to go for Malcolm Brown. I usually don't see Ahmed and Brown on the board at the same time. This is kind of new for me, so I haven't really had to make that decision. So just based on my repetitiveness of always drafting Malcolm Brown, I would probably still lean to him in this situation, but that's my opinion on the Dolphins and Falcons running backs.
Alexander Madison has gotten to be extremely inexpensive as well. Do you have – he was sort of a trendy handcuff pick last year. Dalvin Cook obviously mostly makes it through the season, and it's always interesting to see how a starter making it through a season really impacts the handcuff ADP. The Vikings also do have some sort of stealth deep running backs behind those guys with maybe a little bit more talent than it would appear. What are your thoughts on Madison? Would he take the workload there and be a big impact player if Cook has more of the types of problems that he had pre-2020?
I mean, you kind of hope so, but you've seen Madison the past years when he's had that opportunity, he just hasn't really performed. I feel like that's been a big part of why his ADP has been dropping. Like before, you would never see him in like the round 17 or round 18 of a draft. He was always one of those trendier handcuff running backs. I'd be willing to roll the dice on him this late because, again, if Cook does go down, he is going to be the number 2 running back, and you got to just bank on the possibility that he's actually going to produce or perform at one point. We don't have to make that decision because he just did go 1 pick before of us. If we do want to take a running back here, you've talked up Samaje Perine a lot. I do like that Bengals offense. Probably almost as much as any running back left here other than Kansas City, but I'm just not that into Jerick McKinnon right now. So I'm not sure if you want to go
right here.
Yeah. So then that leaves us to our very last pick of the draft, where we have to decide if we want to take that number 3 tight end. We've kind of talked about quarterbacks who are available, or if not, we're looking at running backs and receivers again. So if we bring up the tight end board, we've kind of talked about how there's not really anybody of note other than maybe Fearmouth. I know Tim Tebow is still there. I'm going to just put him up in the queue. I'll leave KJ Hamler there just in case. And then we look at quarterbacks. Do we decide if Jordan Love is that late round guy? You mentioned Andy Dalton. I can't remember if he went or not. So Andy Dalton still is there. So other than that, what position would you like to target with our last round pick?
So can you pull up our roster for us here so we can kind of look at the bye week situation?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So you can see there at the bottom, quarterbacks, we only have 2, so week 9 and week 7. Running backs, week 13, 7, 9, 10, 6. We don't have we have Johnson and P. Ryan, and then Bernard and Gibson, weeks 10 and 9. And then at receiver, we have Ruggs and Marquise, week 8, and then Deontay and CD, week 7.
Yeah, so with the second week 7 player, in addition to Jerry Judy, that might impact how we feel about Hamler a little bit. He's still probably my guy. He's the person I'm looking at there. I was hoping we didn't have a bunch of week 7 buys, which we don't. We have enough depth that we can kind of go in the direction that we want. I think this pick probably comes down to Hamler, Jordan Love, or one of the running backs.
Okay. So I will put that order, and we just let the draft gods leave it in their hands. So Hamler, Jordan Love, and then you said one of the running backs. Which running back particularly? So Ahmed, McKinnon, Malcolm Brown, Justin Jackson, Hawkins, Booker, Sony, DJ Dallas, Darrell Williams. Keep going.
I think that Ahmed there is probably the guy who I'm looking for some more exposure to, and I think would be an interesting selection. Obviously, with Devontae Booker there and the questions about Saquon Barkley, but I don't want to consider a world in which Barkley isn't ready to do the job for us. We need him to make that round one palatable at all at running back. I'd like to hear your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers. Break down for me what's going to happen there. I mean, he has to come back to the Packers, right? I mean, he's not going to end up with the Denver Broncos and make all of our Broncos stacks work out.
No, I mean, I've been of the mind since all this started that he's either going to come back to the Green Bay Packers or host Jeopardy. Being the host of Jeopardy is completely out of his hands. He has no say whatsoever in that happening. I don't really see Jeopardy deciding to make Aaron Rodgers their permanent host. So at this point, it's either come back, play, start for the Green Bay Packers, or just sit on the bench and do nothing. And I don't see Aaron Rodgers being the type of person to just sit back, not play football when he can play football and win a Super Bowl, because he still is in a situation where his team is good, his team is a playoff contender, and they have the possibility of going very far and deep in the playoffs. I just like Green Bay just seems very stubborn where they don't want to trade them. Like, I mean, Denver could blow them away with an absolutely insane offer, but if they could have done that, I feel like they would have done that by now. Like, there's a lot of hopes and dreams of people seeing their Aaron Rodgers going to Denver and saving the day of all these offensive pieces, but those are just pipe dreams right now. I think it's Green Bay or bust.
Well, I grew up in Kansas City, and to have the Chiefs as the best team in football has been a dream come true for a long time. Patrick Mahomes has them positioned to win multiple championships as we go through this next decade. It would almost be fun, right, if the Broncos would get Rodgers, create a little bit of that rivalry again. I mean, that Broncos-Chiefs rivalry has been so big through the years. The Broncos have been struggling so badly in the post-Peyton Manning era. It would be fun to have that dynamic. We do potentially see that now with the Chargers and Justin Herbert. So looking for those AFC West shootouts, keep the fantasy points going for all of those teams. Speaking of the Chiefs, you had mentioned that you weren't on Jerick McKinnon. You feel like Darrell Williams gets the touches behind him if anything happens to Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
Yeah, that's my mindset right now. That's how I have it broken down. Are you in on McKinnon?
He's such an interesting guy because in the past he's had that type of profile that Kansas City wants. He's had the athleticism. He's had the pass catching ability. He can create those big plays. He would seem to be a good fit in the offense, but the fact that he just really couldn't get it done last year in a very favorable situation with the 49ers. He's one of those players, a little bit like David Johnson, whom we did draft, where he just doesn't seem to be the same guy. And so when you're looking at that situation, I think you have to take that into account. I mean, you can't just be chasing seasons from 2, 3, 4 years ago. With McKinnon, it's almost this idea of chasing the player he could have been if injuries didn't ruin his career. I do think that he makes an interesting choice, however, because the Chiefs have some real trouble at the running back position. Now, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because of the opportunity, because of where he was drafted, because he's a pass-catching back, the fantasy upside is through the roof. If you came back and said, okay, well, he actually finishes the running back 2 behind McCaffrey at the end of the year, I don't think people would be surprised by that. At the same time, if he performed so poorly again in year 2 to where he ended up in a pure timeshare, I don't think people will be that surprised about that either. Williams as the backup is a pretty limited talent. If McKinnon actually were healthy, I think there's opportunity in this offense where you could make the case that Kansas City is one of the least talented teams in the NFL at the running back position.
I mean, especially when you look at it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, then Darrell Williams, Jerick McKinnon. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue against your point there of the talent in Kansas City at the running back position, especially since you are a Chiefs fan. You watch them play all the time. You kind of know what it's like. But it just like when I look at Jerick McKinnon, I just think of what could have been and what hasn't been over his career.
So we do take Hamler in the last round. I keep my ownership of him at near 100% levels. Sal, this is a team that is a lot of fun, and people will sometimes ask me at the end of these drafts, what do you wish you would have done differently? What mistakes did you make? And, what picks do you regret? And I'm always saying, you can't regret your picks, right? When you're on the clock, you pick somebody you like. And so no regrets at the end. We have a fun team here. a lot of fun players.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest mistake was Raheem Mostert in round 10. That was supposed to be Jarvis Landry. Even if we did take Landry there instead of Mostert, I'm not sure how different our team would have been. We probably wouldn't have taken 3 straight receivers. We might have taken running back a little bit earlier, but say if we did take Landry there, so you take Landry in round 10, and say in round 11, maybe go with a running back, we're looking at what, like a Ronald Jones type. So like say if we said, would you rather have Jarvis Landry and Ronald Jones over Raheem Mostert and Marquise Brown? I mean, I'm not sure if you can outright say yes 100%.
No, I think that the way it worked out is perfectly fine. I think that Mostert over some of those guys later. Perhaps Zach Moss would be the guy. It would have been nice if Devin Singletary had lasted a little bit longer, had gotten to us for the pick there where we were discussing him. We end up getting David Johnson at a discount. We get the running backs we were really looking at. And so from a running back perspective, I mean, this is going to be one of the strongest teams I draft all year with the early guys and then also hitting our 0 RB targets late. Now, this isn't a 0 RB build, but those targets that really make that work out, the team should be very strong at that position. The one area that we might have done it a little bit differently is really in round 12, where we were discussing Elijah Moore versus Henry Ruggs. We do get Ruggs coming back around in round 13. If we go with Mac Jones in round 12, then we're not sitting here saying, well, we only have 2 QBs. How is that going to work out? At the same time, again, I always look at these situations where you have a couple of choices. You go one direction. For me, my experience is that the luck works for you, right? And so Mac Jones, there's very much this potential for him not being the QB for a long time. We see that very clearly by the fact that Cam Newton was taken many rounds earlier. Mm-hmm. If someone is betting on Newton at that price, then it's clear cut that it's not clear cut, right? It could go either direction there. I don't think you necessarily in a best ball league where maximization of roster spots is the thing, right? Everything in best ball is about maximizing the roster spots you have because you can't make any changes. And so you don't want part-time players, half-the-year players in a best ball draft.
If we look at the board overall, there's one other team other than ourselves that only took 2 quarterbacks. It was team 2 with Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. So you can't really fault them for not taking a third quarterback, just like we didn't take a third quarterback because we had Josh Allen and Tom Brady. So then we look at the possibilities of who could have been our third quarterback. And we look at, you mentioned Cam Newton went in round 8 compared to Mac Jones in round 12. That probably was like, I don't want to say like the TSN turning point of our draft, but that's probably the one area where we could have reversed it and went Mac Jones and then taken maybe, I don't know if Elijah Moore would have fallen, but we did get Henry Ruggs. So Jones and Ruggs I would have been okay with because we still could have taken like a Rashad Bateman later on in the draft to kind of make up for that receiver fall. But if we look at these like QB2 options, Teddy Bridgewater went in round 10. As much as I love Teddy Bridgewater compared to Drew Lock, should Teddy Bridgewater go in round 10 when Drew Lock went completely undrafted? Like if we really wanted that QB3, we could have taken Drew Lock. The other situations like Jameis Winston in round 6 compared to Taysom Hill in round 11. I'm not sure why there's a 5-round difference between those 2 quarterbacks, honestly. And in San Francisco, Trey Lance in round 5 compared to Jimmy Garoppolo in round 14. So if you're like us and we only take 2 quarterbacks and we're trying to figure out who our third quarterback is going to be later on, like based on this draft, we're looking at round 12 if we really wanted Mac Jones or Jimmy Garoppolo and then Jordan Love. So you kind of have to decide how important is that QB3 to your roster and how does it fit in with your quarterback build. So like, for example, yes, I would have preferred to have a third quarterback, but I'm not super upset about it because of who the quarterbacks are that we have.
And you look at this draft, there really is no possible option to take a QB after round 5, right? The last guys that you would really want in this draft would be Derek Carr, Justin Fields. They went in round 6, but they went before our pick in round 6. And so really the last legitimate options are in that round 5 range. We talked before the draft about how 2 QB early and then the third QB a little bit later really is the structure that has worked the best in these types of formats. Now, the 3 QB early will also work. What you don't want to do is have some approach that's different than those two things. And so we could have gone with that 3rd QB in round 5. If we take a Baker Mayfield, if we take a Ryan Fitzpatrick, you could even make an argument for Ben Roethlisberger in round 7. He would be the one pick after round 5 that potentially would work out to make that a 3 QB team. But I like the way that this developed, and I like the values that we got with the rest of those picks. ETN in 6, Logan Thomas in 7. We didn't have as much wide receiver firepower as I would like, but I think that we have a lot of upside with the guys that we got in 11, 12, and 13. Again, I would emphasize the fact that wide receiver is not that deep. We have Lamb, Johnson, Judy. That's not enough. And if you're going into the season confident in Marquise Brown, Elijah Moore, and Henry Ruggs, then you're overconfident, right? But I think the mix will work out here. If you're going to be down on wide receivers like we are, then I would want to structure it this way. It's just you can't have everything in every draft. And we did have QBs early, tight ends early, running backs early, and the specific guys that we got I like a lot.
So the one player I do want to highlight, I feel like you're not as high on Zach Wilson as I might be. For me, the factor is with Wilson is he's going to be starting week 1. He has absolutely no competition behind him at the quarterback. If you've seen the New York Jets' quarterback depth chart, you have to wonder why they haven't brought in an actual quarterback too. He has a little bit of rushing upside to him. He has a ton of offensive weapons around him. And going on is like round 7 might be a little bit too early, but I would way rather have him than like Roethlisberger or Darnold or Winston. But when you look at it in terms of quarterback ADP, QB 28, I feel like that is a pretty damn good value for Zach Wilson, who is someone I feel has the potential to be a very high-end QB2, potential low-end QB1.
So you're calling him as the Justin Herbert of 2021.
I mean, if we have to label it, I guess so. Like that, he would have been the only guy I would really want to draft as my QB3 after the build we had started with Allen and Brady, based on the value of quarterbacks in this particular draft. Like he doesn't always go in round 7, but around QB 20, like I've seen his like quarterback ADP be around like QB 24 to QB 30. It kind of depends on the draft room you're in and who is or isn't a Wilson believer.
And Wilson is another guy that Blair and I drafted a lot in FFPC Superflex Classics earlier in the year. And like you said, for those reasons, I still do like him. It'll be interesting to see if the wide receivers are enough to hold him up. I think anytime where you have 3 or 4 or 5 wide receiver 2 types of players, then you don't have the alpha guy who can pull him along. I think Elijah Moore becomes that, even though he's a smaller player. It was interesting. RotoViz is famous for team big wide receiver. We had JJ on Stealing Bananas recently, and he mentioned that he wasn't as high on this rookie class at wide receiver because they're small guys, they're fast guys, and there is still something very much to the bigger element. Matt Spencer sort of rejuvenated our freak score for the wide receiver position recently. And one of the things that he found is that the freak score that the Fantasy Douche put together all those years ago holds up extremely well and gives you guys who are going to be big touchdown scorers. And so when we're looking at receivers who have that big upside, Mike Evans was someone that we had talked about and didn't pick, but I think was a good value in this draft. So there's something to be said for having that wide receiver who can make the entire team better. Moore may be a long-term high-end number 2. I don't think that they have a number 1 guy. Certainly the fact that they are not in on Denzel Mims, you can say, yeah, that helps the other receivers, but I think that is a net negative for this offense. It would be a lot better for Zach Wilson if multiple receivers were generating buzz within that offense. But he has a lot of interesting things to him, as you mentioned, starting from the beginning. And even though the Jets should be an improved team, they are going to be a team that plays from behind. There should be a lot of passing attempts. You get a lot of garbage points from Wilson this season. And unless he's completely overwhelmed, that garbage time period should really give him a higher fantasy floor maybe than where he's being drafted.
So we are about to hit hour 2 of the stream. I know I'm going to wrap this up soon, but I want to wrap it up with a little bit of love I want you to tell the audience who you think has the best team, or if not the best team, your favorite team outside of ours.
Okay, I have to take a little bit of a look here. One of the things that I do like is if you have the 101 and you end up with sort of a running back heavy team there, you take a very high floor, but then you go heavy at wide receiver and tight end after that. I think that it's a very good way to play McCaffrey. You come back in rounds 2 and 3 and take a couple of quarterbacks. I currently have the privilege to be in the 2 QBs mock draft for the 2 QB draft guide that Sal and Greg are going to be putting out this season. And that's the way that I started, with McCaffrey and then 2 quarterbacks at the 2-3 turn. He has DeAndre Swift, a player who at that point in the draft has a lot of value. He goes with Kirk Cousins. Maybe you don't need Cousins at that point when you have Stafford and Tannehill, but we talked about how after round 5, it really wasn't there anymore. But then he really hammers the receivers. So you get Amari Cooper, Odell Beckham, Tyler Boyd, Brandon Cooks, Michael Pittman, and sprinkles in Noah Fant and Robert Tonyan. So again, if Aaron Rodgers comes back, Tonyan a good pick at that point. It's easy to say, okay, well, the guy who has McCaffrey is going to be the favorite. But one of the things that you do find in a lot of these drafts is that the player who has McCaffrey either doesn't know how to build off of that or is overconfident as a result. So you see a lot of bad builds with Christian McCaffrey. I think you have to give credit when someone has McCaffrey and then puts together a roster that really should be the favorite, right? If McCaffrey stays healthy, it's going to be very difficult to beat that team. Sal, who are you liking from this group?
So I like to lean towards teams that would draft similar to me. And the one team that stands out is Team 2. Not particularly the QB start, but I do love the fact that they end up with Mahomes and Burrow, but that they had Hawkinson and Andrews as their 2 tight ends. So you have a very heavy quarterback and a very heavy tight end build. Those receivers are just insane that he ended up going, because he just completely bypassed running back. But he has a lot of my favorite, like lower round, mid-round running back targets in Pollard, Moss, Hines, and White. And he still ended up with Rashad Bateman too, and added Cole Kmet to his tight end group. Mainly because he went Hawkinson and Andrews. He was just like a man after my own heart of grabbing a couple of tight ends early.
Well, and that's to get the plug in. I mean, that's a pure RotoViz branded team right there. You have the stud QBs, you have the stud tight ends, and then no running back until round 10. One of the things that we see when we look at the roster construction explorers and try and decide how well these late round running back teams work is that not enough people are doing it for us to feel completely confident in saying it, but the numbers are fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. For these 0 running back builds. And so if you're uncomfortable with the running backs who are there, you want to do something a little bit different, you want to experiment and have fun with your draft, go 0 RB in best ball. It's very effective in that format.
And Tim Talmadge, RotoViz friend, RotoViz writer, he knows how much of a RotoViz team that is. I feel like that's a good place to wrap it up. A lot of RotoViz love. Everyone knows that they can find your work on RotoViz. They can listen to your podcasts on RotoViz Radio. Why don't you tell the audience exactly what you got going on these days, and know where they can find you on Twitter?
Right. So with the debut of Stealing Bananas, I've been pushing the idea that if you want to follow me on Twitter, maybe sometime in the future, I will be back, and it would be great to come back to this huge number of completely undeserved followers, right? So if you want to do that, you can follow me at @FF_contrarian. I did remember what it actually used to be for tonight's show. But no, the place that you can find me, writing on RotoViz, have a lot of cool articles coming out, at least concepts I'm excited about. Going to talk a little bit about the fall of the Uber back, and if this sort of golden age of running back scoring, the first golden age since the very beginning of the century, if that's about to end, right? In addition to that, as you mentioned, RotoViz Radio, it's been a lot of fun doing Stealing Bananas with Ben Gretsch. We've been excited about and thankful for the reception that show has gotten. Colin Kelly and I recorded 4 shows today for RotoViz Overtime, the long-term podcast that I had with him. If you don't follow Colin, he is the greatest. He's at Overtime Ireland. You want to get a little bit of a UK flavor to your pods, to your drafts. Colin is the guy. Everybody who listens to the show says that he has the best voice in fantasy football. And so check us out on RotoViz OT.
So because you don't, maybe you do check Twitter and you just don't tell anybody. I still randomly tweet at your account, and Mr. Kelly there was trying to convince me that he was actually Shawn Siegele, even though I didn't fall for it. But there's a potential, like if someone were to hack into your account, I'm not sure they would know who would be the real Shawn Siegele and who would be the fake Shawn Siegele, just because you haven't been there in so long.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it close to the vest in terms of whether or not I'm checking out the old Twitter machine. But like I said, maybe someday in the future. But if you have an interest in some of the things we've talked about on the stream today, Sal, thank you so much for the invitation. It's been great to be here with you on this 4for4 show. Obviously, sites that have a lot of great content, and you can't get me on Twitter, but if you do like the show, there are a lot of pods right now that I'm on between OT and Stealing Bananas. There's almost a pod a day. So I don't know, after you've listened to the stream, after you've seen our team, after you see us with the 2 QBs, you may be like, I'm out. I'm going to unsubscribe from those RotoViz radio shows. But if not, we have a lot of fun on the channel. You'll love some of the other shows. Curtis Patrick, Dave Cabin on the flagship, Travis May on the college football, Debbie, lots of other great stuff. And again, Sal, thanks. It's been a blast tonight.
I know I'm contractually obligated to say that 4for4 is my favorite fantasy football website, but higher ups probably aren't watching right now, and I can go on the record and say that rotoviz.com is actually my favorite fantasy football website. Has been from the very first day it came on to the scene. This has been an absolute pleasure to draft the team with you, Shawn. You can find our account on Twitter. We actually tweet from it at 4for4football. You can find Shawn at RotoViz and RotoViz Radio. Thanks for watching, everybody. Greg will be back next week.